I suspect that the applause is here because we made that possible and not for me. And I think that this is actually the right thing to do. So welcome everyone. I'm speaking in English so that we can all be on the same side, sort of. It's a very special day for us. And I'm sure that Werner really wanted to see the temple of Olympic Zeus in the hail. So he had to do that because he didn't have the chance to film it on another day. So the weather is part of the plan. I'm very glad that we are all here for this special encounter between Werner Herzog and Paul Holdengräber. Obviously, I don't need to say much about Werner, other than his grandfather was an archaeologist in Greece, other than that he's an extremely kind man, and that he manages somehow to keep himself, and above all Paul, safe and sane at the same time, which I doubt. I think that this amazing woman and a wonderful artist, Werner Herzog, is doing all the job and all the work. So it's great having them both here. And just to make sure that I have told you the necessary stuff, this is not going to be an ordinary discussion. Don't look at your watches. This is going to take 1 minute and forever at the same time. These two friends, these two men, have been talking to each other for years. They say they speak to each other once a year. I doubt it. When they say that they talk to each other once a year, they mean that they meet in the center of volcanoes, they meet in the depths of lakes, and this is the context that changes. Otherwise, I think they're in constant communication with each other. But do immerse yourself into the whole situation. Do enjoy yourselves. And do allow me to say a few words about Holdengräber, Paul Holdengräber as well, apart from the fact that he's a dear, dear friend, a member of the executive board of the Onassis Foundation, so that you know what our board members look like and think like. He's our new executive director in Los Angeles, so he's going to be even closer to Werner in that sense. And he's a very special man. You'll see what madness can do to extremely intelligent people who really love life, and they're not scared of being connected to others. I want to thank Pasqua Vorgia for making this happen. We had a perfect collaboration. This did not happen on one day. We've been going after this kind of moment for years, believe it or not. And it's almost overwhelming for us at the Onassis Foundation, having spent like the day before yesterday with Democracy is Coming Festival in New York, with people like David Byrne and Michael Imperialis and Patti Smith, being here today with Werner Herzog. It's not a matter of being around famous people. It's being around people who have actually changed our mindset over the years, and they have made us look at life through difficult, disturbing, and overwhelming angles, which makes life much more interesting and livable and live-worthy. So thank you all. I promise Pasqua not to forget to introduce the video that's following, so please make sure that you dive into the pictures you're going to see in the images. Please immerse yourself into this encounter in general. Thank you very much for being here.
There was also an attraction from early on in Chatwin's life for mysterious landscapes, landscapes of his soul. This stone, for some radiating paranormal energies, forms part of a vast Neolithic complex at Avebury in Wiltshire. From his nearby boarding school in Marlborough, the young Bruce would ride his bike here all the time. Part of this complex is Silbury Hill, the largest Neolithic structure in the world. This is where he was somehow centered. This was his pivot, his mythical place of origin. Everything is an echo of this.
Crossing because I think the force is going that way.
Yeah. Can you show us again here? Do you feel the force? Is it like electric or?
No, it just crosses. So if I went this way now, in theory, it will cross again. See?
Show us again how it crosses.
It just it just settles down. It just. And you can see them wavering.
Yeah.
So there I'm fine. So nothing's happening, but as soon as I start to walk, they cross. And now it's trying to go the other way because it knows that I think the force is going that way.
And what forces are they?
They're just possibly magnetic forces that run around the world. It's there's lots of them, and Wiltshire is quite prevalent. They've got quite a lot of ley lines running through Wiltshire, possibly why they settled here. Perhaps our ancestors could feel it, and that's why they moved here. Who knows?
I can sort of visualize him completely here. You know, when we used to come here, I can see him walking around. Cool. So cool.
This is Elizabeth Chetwin, Bruce's widow. She took us to Lantony Priory in Wales, a hideaway during the early courtship. The landscape around here became one of the essential locations where he would find his inner balance.
Bruce was a nomad, but he was always drawn back to this place, the Black Hills in Wales. But this is a dreaming place. I mean, these hills.
His inner landscape.
His inner landscape, yeah.
Landscape of his soul.
I think so. Landscape of his soul, yes.
But apart from the idyllic landscapes that gave a feeling of home, of belonging, Bruce Chatwin was searching for strangeness. He always liked my first feature film for this. In it, the protagonist, a German World War II soldier on a reconnaissance mission, suddenly becomes insane when he stumbles across this valley of 10,000 windmills. Bruce, in our conversations, mentioned this scene often. He coined the term deranged landscape for it. Quest for strangeness was recognized by others who knew Chatwin. In Australia, Petronella Varson Morell, whom he adored, wrote in a letter to him a quote from the poet Rilke that sums it up.
My letter ended. I'm reminded of the words of Rainer Maria Rilke, that at bottom the only courage that is demanded of us, to have courage for the most strange, the most singular, and the most inexplicable that we may encounter. I'm glad to have met you.
It was you who wrote that to him, yes. Go.
First of all, I want to thank you all for coming here, and I want to thank the Onassis Foundation for inviting me and for having the patience of 2 years waiting for Werner Herzog to come here, the first time he is speaking in Athens in a public forum. I want to also thank the president of the foundation, Anthony Papadimitriou, and Aphrodite Panayotakou. I think I got that right, which I'm so proud of. It's a great pleasure and a great honor for me to be here. Werner and I think, speak once a year together. As I've been asked quite a few times, why do you speak once a year together? Haven't you arrived at the end of what you have to say? And I often say that with some people you arrive at the end after 3 minutes. With some people it just takes a whole lifetime. And I always say that I speak to Werner Herzog once a year because it's the only thing that really keeps me sane. Now, Werner, tell us something about what we just saw. This is a brand new film, which isn't even out yet, about Bruce Chatwin. And why a film about Bruce Chatwin now? What is it special about Chatwin that made you feel you had to do this film?
Well, we showed this here at the very beginning because in a way it sums it up what we are doing during this evening. It has many elements in it, and of course it's a brand new film. Everybody believes that my last film was Meeting Gorbachev, which is going to be shown publicly very soon. It has actually been shown at some festivals, but in the United States, Meeting Gorbachev will be released theatrically in a few days from now. But this here nobody has ever seen. The BBC who produced it gave us permission. I always keep saying, take it as work in progress. You have not seen anything. Nobody has ever seen anything. This here, you're the very first audience for a small segment of the film. Bruce Chatwin, I was asked to do this film because we have been, in a way, close to each other, very much concerning fundamental themes about nomadism. The title of the film, by the way, is Nomad, and then secondary title, In the Footsteps of Bruce Chatwin. So, and since he ran into me in Australia when I was preparing Where the Green Ants Dream. During that time, we were both working in Australia, and I wanted to meet him and found out where he was, and he detoured to Melbourne at that time where I was doing pre-production. And we had an immediate rapport. In fact, it was strange because from the airport where I picked him up, he was non-stop storytelling. He was a phenomenal storyteller. And I squeezed in some stories. Whenever he took a little breath, I tried to tell stories. So it went for 48 hours, literally. I mean, we slept a few hours in between, but at breakfast, he finished the sentence that he had left unfinished. And Chatwin, for example, and we have witnesses, and in the film you see it, he would enter into a house where there was a party, but he wasn't even invited. And people tell me that while he was, before he even entered the house, when he left the car, and when he entered the house, he was already telling a story. And entering, he was in the middle of the story, and everybody would congregate.
You remember the story?
Yes, sure, of course, and he was mimicking very well with Australian Aborigines, and it's in the film. He spoke about one story that's vividly in my mind. A very wealthy American couple arrives in the Australian outback at a mission station where there was a group of Aborigines, and they fly in a private aeroplane. And the lady, the woman, comes in high heels and immediately takes photos of an old Aborigine who is squatting on the ground. And he spits at her feet in contempt. And she knows she's done something wrong. She should have asked permission. And she apologizes profusely. And she says, I should have asked you for permission. And can we bring you something? Can we give you something? Do you need anything here? We can send you things. What would it be? And the Aborigine, without missing a beat, says, 4 Toyota pickup trucks. So, and how he mimicked the voice of the Aborigine was phenomenal. So a quintessential storyteller. And of course, we had many things in common, traveling on foot, for example.
Can I show image number 1?
Yes, what is it? I don't
right
even...
there.
The rucksack. Do we have it here? When Bruce Chatwin died, I just had finished a film that I did in the Southern Sahara about nomadic tribesmen. And he wanted to see it, but when I arrived, I mean, there was only a skeleton left of him. He was already dying, and he said to me, Werner, I'm dying, help me to die quickly. And so I said, shall I bash in your head with a baseball bat, or shall I shoot you? What do you mean by that? And he thought I could get him some sort of strong sleeping pills that would put him away, which didn't happen, but he actually saw my film in bits, 10 minutes, and then he would lapse into a semi-coma and wake up again, and then he would shout out, I've got to be on the road again, I've got to be on the road again. And then he realized, he looked at his legs, there were only bones. And he said, I cannot carry my rucksack anymore, it's too heavy. And I said to him, Bruce, I can carry it. I'm strong. And then when he actually was dying, only 2 days away from dying, he asked me if I could leave. He was embarrassed to die in front of me. And he gave me his rucksack, which he has carried it 10,000 kilometers on his back. And I have carried it, and it's very valuable, an enormous piece of reminiscences and lifestyle and exploring the world and exploring landscapes. And you have seen it in this clip, and we left it long enough so that you could see a portion, black and white, of the windmills at the plateau of Lassithi in eastern Crete, on the island of Crete. I was traveling on foot all along the island with a donkey, but in the mountains, not along the coast. I was in the mountains, and I come across towards the end of passing all the way through the island of Crete. I look down and I see what you see in the film. And I was only 15 or 16, and I was sure I was insane. What I see cannot be. It is beyond what you expect, beyond sanity, deranged. But I thought I was deranged. I thought I was insane.
And Chatwin, very interestingly enough, talks about deranged landscape.
Yes, it's a very good way to label it. And it's, in a way, it is an inner landscape. Unfortunately, it does not exist anymore. It was used, the windmills were used for irrigation. But they replaced it many years ago with diesel generators to pump water to the surface. And only a year ago, the mayor of the small town or the village of Lassithi sent me an email whether I could join a committee to restore it and to bring it back to life. But I think they shouldn't have removed it in the first place. It saddens my heart that what you see does not exist anymore.
And what also brings you, I mean, you spoke about that in passing, but it's so important. You will notice that Werner Herzog doesn't talk about walking. It's very important. He doesn't say
traveling on foot.
Traveling on foot.
Yeah.
And every time I've used walking, he corrects me and says, no, it's traveling on foot. And
I'm not a backpacker. You see, backpackers have their
backpacker.
No, they have their household on their back, meaning a tent, a sleeping bag, cooking utensils. I'm not one of those.
Why not?
Travel, it's not my way to experience a landscape and experiencing the world. It is something different. When you are traveling with the bare necessities, you have to get in touch with people. You're thirsty and your canteen is empty and there's no water anywhere, so you have to knock at the next farmhouse.
And that's when you get stories.
And that's where I get stories, but I need some water. I have to ask, can I fill my canteen, my bottle in your kitchen? And of course everybody is very suspicious, but the moment they understand that I have come on foot, that I have traveled on foot,
They ask you where you came from.
Yeah, I would say, let's say Munich, And they said, but this is 1,200 kilometers away. How did you come? I said, yeah, on foot. From that and you can tell if somebody has traveled that far. You can look, you can smell it, and you can tell. So, and from then
you
on,
did it. I mean,
sure,
you know
yes.
that we might evoke it because I'm not sure everybody knows, but you actually did do that trip from Munich to Paris.
Well, that was a different
It's a
traveling,
different,
yes. That was when my mentor, very old lady, Lotte Eisner, was something like 80 and she was dying. And I said, I will not allow her to die. I will immediately travel to Paris. But of course, I immediately thought about flight connections, train connections. And then very quickly I decided, no, I will come on foot. It doesn't matter how far it is. It's something like 3.5 weeks straightest walk, and it was in beginning of winter with snowstorms coming from the west at me. And I arrived, and she did not know that I was coming on foot, but she was out of hospital, and she died. She died then something like 8 years later when she was around 88. And she asked me to come again, and she said, well, there's still this spell on me that I must not die, I'm not allowed to die. Can you lift the spell? Because now I'm almost blind, and I cannot read anymore, I cannot see movies anymore, I cannot walk anymore, and it would be time now for me to die. And I said, Lotte, it's fine, yes, spell is taken from you, and she died, I think, 8 or 10 days later, which was fine then. It was okay. But when I traveled once around Germany, my own country, on the very border, Austria, Switzerland, France, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg.
But I want to mention also the reason also I'm bringing of walking in ice.
Of walking in ice.
Of walking in ice is that you told me that there is a Greek translation that is coming out now, or that
fairly
is
soon,
out
yes.
very
yes.
soon.
And it's wonderful that this book will be available. It's a book that doesn't go away. It has had numerous editions in German language. It was written back in 1974, diaries. And it doesn't die away, and all of a sudden in some South American countries, Chile, Argentina, people start to discover it. It's bestseller in Chile, bestseller in Argentina. And I think it's right, there's something good about it, because the written things of walking in ice, and then I have it also, Conquest of the Useless. It's when I did the film Fitzcarraldo, but it's not diaries of movie making. It's something else. It's also invented landscapes, fever dreams in the jungle. And this book doesn't go away. And I think what I've written will live longer than my films. I'm totally convinced of that. I may be wrong, like in many other things, but I don't believe it. That it will
Coming
go away.
back to walking on foot, you have said about Chatwin, Chatwin said about walking on foot, he said, my God is a God of walkers. If you walk hard enough, you probably don't need any other God.
Yes, he says it well. Yeah. And we had a...
You'd agree?
Immediately, yes, and we both knew that traveling on foot was the way to experience the world. The world reveals itself to those who travel on foot. And I had a dictum which said, traveling on foot, I have to get it right. Tourism is sin, but traveling on foot is virtue. And tourism is a very profound form of sin, and it's one of the sins of our present time, although it has its roots in former times. But mass tourism is something which has done too much damage to cultures, to everything. It's not what we should do.
You know, I remember an essay which George Santayana, the American Spanish philosopher, wrote called The Philosophy of Travel, where he very interestingly enough says that Aristotle said that plants are firmly planted in the soil.
Yeah.
They get their sustenance from the soil, while men have the intelligence of locomotion.
Yeah, well said. I didn't know that quote.
I have a
You
few,
always surprise me, yes.
I always have a few
Yeah,
quotes, a few new ones for you.
Yes.
But
I would like to come back to the
Chatwin.
windmills and
Yeah.
Chatwin and experiencing landscapes. It started very early for me, and when I saw La City, I think I was 16. I was a kid, I was a school kid at that time, but I went because I was in a way in the footsteps of my grandfather, Rudolf, who was an archaeologist.
we can look at image 17.
And he did his life's work on the island of Kos. He discovered and excavated the Asklepieion in Kos. And he was always more fascinating for me than my own father. My own father had very little contact with me, but with my own grandfather I had a very deep rapport, although most of the time during his last 8 years, he was completely insane. And I was always fascinated by things that became deranged and not in the orderly sort of thinking. He used to have his scientific books and underline important passages with a pencil. But the last books that he actually read and worked on, every single word, every single line from beginning to end was underlined and highlighted. So, and sometimes he would...
And what did that mean to you then?
It was very, very stunning for me, because I myself am I'm not a very fast reader, and I absorb things and I contemplate over lines that I've read. There are books where it took me a fortnight until I got over the first paragraph. And it's true. For example, Thomas Bernhard, a wonderful Austrian writer, and the book is Gehen, Walking. The first paragraph is so strange and so complex that it took me a fortnight until I could read on.
Do you remember it?
No, if I start to quote from it, I would drive you nuts. I'm not going to do that. But back to my grandfather, he also was sometimes very repetitive. He would not, for example, recognize my own grandmother, with whom he was married happily for over 60 years. And he would be formally dressed for dinner, and he would address her with madam and be very polite and speak to her. And my grandmother, when he had died, said to me, she confided in me, and she said he was such a wonderful husband. She would never allow him to be admitted to a lunatic asylum. She took care of him, and he would each night, in fear he would be deported, God knows why and where. He would put all the furnitures on top of each other for the truck to take it away, and he would put all his dresses out of the cupboards and pile it up, and she would always put it back. It was a complete repetition of things, and really very tragic. And we as children, we were cruel, and we would shout at him, I have to say it in German, Herr Professor Menschenfresser, Mr. Professor Cannibal, it rhymes. And he would come after us, but we would climb into the birch tree where he couldn't reach us. And my grandmother noticed it one day, and I got the hardest beating in my life. And I deserved it. It was fine. Yeah, I never regretted of having gotten that beating. And one day...
Let's look at image 18 and 19, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah. One day at dinner, he would, that's part of the Asklepieion, one day he would fold his napkin very carefully and put the table in order, and he would stand up and bow to her, and he would say, "Madam, if I were not married already, I would ask for your hand." And it's really sweet. It really touches my heart. He's one of those. And somehow with his echo of these repetitions of putting his things together and waiting for the truck every night and repeating phrases and underlining phrases in books, in a way influenced the short film Last Words, which it's my only film that I shot in modern Greek language. At that time, more than 50 years ago, I actually spoke Greek, which is completely buried now.
Should
unfortunately.
we show it?
We could, but it's a very strange film.
But that's okay. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of things we will show could pass for strange. So I think we should show it because we're talking about it right now.
Which clip is it?
Do you want to say something about it?
No, it was just totally bold, courageous to make a film where people repeat what they just said. And I found musicians in the town of Rethymnon, and I really loved the old man who plays the lira. And I quickly arranged a film around him and shot it partially at night time or on Sundays, while on regular working hours or regular days I was shooting Signs of Life. And it's very dear to my heart because that, in a way, it was a breakthrough for me because I did things that were not within the rules of filmmaking. Nobody has done anything like this, and the cinematographer at that time said to me, you are doing things that you shouldn't do, it's not how films are being told. And I said, no, I'm telling it like I think it should be told, and it's new ground, and we are inventors of cinema. I always had the feeling I was the inventor of cinema, and that's one of those moments. Can
so
we
let's
show
play it at good
clip?
volume, and we'll get out of your way.
All right.
No, they're not showing the right one.
No, it's the wrong one.
No. It's.
Can we stop it?
Apologies.
Can we stop it? It's Paul. You gave.
It's. I should have said. It's my mistake. It's
Yes.
number 3.
Number 3. By the way, the house here is phenomenal. You do not see everybody who has worked here on the set. There were last moment changes, and the people whom you do not see normally did a wonderful job and very, very quick. Paul, the mistake is you, but now we show the right one, which is number.
You noticed that the mistake is me.
Yes.
But now we see. Clip
03.
03.
Okay.
Let's get it right. That was very nice of you to tell them. After that, I'll talk about the last troubadours, and then I'll go to the landscape of the soul.
Yeah. And we should have some reading from Conquest here.
Τελικά το μόνο που έχει μείνει στη Σπιναλόγκα είναι μια παλιά γεννήτρια. Ο μόνος τρόπος για να φωτιζόντουσαν. Αλλά από την άλλη μεριά είναι ανοησία βέβαια, γιατί δεν είχαν καν τρεχούμενο νερό. Είχαν στέρνες που γεμίζαν από βροχή. Καμία οργάνωση. Όλοι όσοι πηγαίναν εκεί, προορισμό τους είχαν το θάνατο φυσικά. Όλοι το ξέραν πως μια μέρα θα πεθάνουνε. Λέγονται πάρα πολλές ιστορίες. Αυτή τη στιγμή που σας μιλάω μπροστά στην κάμερα, αυτός ο άνθρωπος μπορεί και να έχει πεθάνει τώρα. Υπάρχουν πολλές ιστορίες.
Καλημέρα σας. Τι κάνετε? 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 Γυρίσουμε τώρα αλλιώς. Εμείς τον πήραμε από εκεί, εμείς το σώσαμε. Εμείς τον πήραμε από εκεί, εμείς το σώσαμε. Εμείς τον πήραμε από εκεί, εμείς το σώσαμε. Εμείς τον πήραμε από εκεί, εμείς το σώσαμε.
Ο τελευταίος Τούρκος που παράτησε αυτό το νησί ανέβηκε σε ένα ψηλό βράχο για να πηδήξει στη θάλασσα να προλάβει τσάλους. Στο βράχο παρέτησε νεκιά το αποτύπωμα του ποδιού του και χτίσανε νεκιά μια εκκλησιά για να θυμούνται οι δικοί μας το γεγονός. Ο τελευταίος Τούρκος που παρέτησε το μικρό νησί ανέβηκε σε ένα ψηλό βράχο για να πηδήξει στη θάλασσα να προλάβει τσάλους. Στο βράχο απάνω παρέτησε το αποτύπωμα του ποδιού του και χτίσανε και μια εκκλησιά για να θυμούνται οι δικοί μας το γεγονός. Ο τελευταίος Τούρκος που παρέτησε το μικρό νησί ανέβηκε σε ένα ψηλό βράχο και να πηδήξει στη θάλασσα για να προλάβει τσάλους. Παρέτησε εκεί το αποτύπωμα του ποδιού του και οι δικοί μας κτίζανε μια εκκλησιά για να θυμούνται την ιστορία. Δεν λέω τίποτα. Τίποτα, τι θα σας πω. Δεν λέω, έτσι γουστάρω. Δεν θέλω τίποτα. Δεν λέω τίποτα. Δεν λέω τίποτα. Τίποτα δεν λέω. Μου γουστάρω, δεν λέω τίποτα. Όχι, δεν λέω. Όχι, δεν λέω. Όχι, δεν λέω. Σας είπα δεν λέω. Όχι, δεν λέω. Τελευταία μου σας λέξη είπα δεν λέω. Τελείωσε. Τελείωσε, δεν λέω τελευταία μου λέξη, σας είπα δεν λέω τίποτα. Δεν λέω. Δεν μ' αρέσει, δεν λέω. Δεν λέω. Τίποτα δεν λέω. Δεν λέω τίποτα. Σας είπα τελευταία μου λέξη, αυτό είναι. Τελείωσε.
Yes, the film is very dear to my heart for many reasons.
You know, you said it is as if I filmed, of the musicians, you said it is as if I filmed the last troubadours. How did you mean that?
Well, when you see them, it's like an ancient form of communicating through music just in a taverna at the harbor, and they would come out and play music, and just for the joy of it, and people came and like me, and I would sit with them for long hours and talk to them and have wine with them, and
they hadn't learned music. They hadn't learned.
No, it's all without music scores. They explained that just by listening, and that's the way I like to hear music. And in a way, I imagine that in ancient Greek times, tragedies and chorus, the way it was sung, or the way, for example, the Odyssey was recited and a chant was probably in a similar way like what we see today. It's an old and very ancient tradition, and on the island of Crete, of course, you had it for a long time. I think it's fading away, but what I witnessed in in the mid-60s is something which is very deeply embedded in my heart.
Can we look at image number 2 and then at image number 3?
Well, that's from my school, the Odyssey. I had to learn ancient Greek. Let's pass over quickly.
Image number... No, but...
Paul discovered that I made the accents for the hexameter.
But
let's take it out.
No. I knew you wouldn't want to talk about this, but I'm going to keep you there for a minute, because you actually said that this is... I did find this in your bookshelf. You said that there was a moment when you actually spoke in hexameters.
I could, yes. At that time, I could speak in free speech, in conversation with you. I could speak in hexameters. It was so in me that I could make it up, and it came with great ease. And you see some of the first things on first page or so. You see in pencil the hexameter accents, which of course are in a way partially artificial, because for example, third line from the bottom, paros, the accent is on the A, but in hexameter it would shift to the end of the word. So anyway.
And you liked the word doom.
Yes.
The word doom.
Yeah.
You told me.
Yes, I mean how it starts.
Do you remember?
I say it as we would read it, menina edithia, peleatio achilleos, ulomenen. The wrath and ulomene you cannot really fully translate, but it's so full of doom and so full of wrath. But I'm reciting not Odyssey, but that's the beginning of the Iliad. And I must say I started to love it later much more than during school. I was always unhappy in school and would always be at the brink of being thrown out because I'm so much self-taught. And today I'm going a little bit back into ancient Greek, although I use, for example, an edition where you would have English on one side and the original ancient Greek on the other side. But I try not to look at the translation. But instead of looking into the dictionary, I have a look at the English translation. So I read some obscure writers like Diodorus Siculus, who is an encyclopedist, not really that intelligent, but wonderful when it comes to the father of Alexander the Great, when it comes to Philip II of Macedon, and also to Alexander the Great.
And you travel. There's certain books that you put in your backpack, as it were.
Yes, sometimes I do have things on me. By the way, Chatwin quite often in the rucksack that we showed to you had Of Walking in Ice on him. He loved this book. And so I was astonished that he would care so much about this very book.
But some of the books you travel with books by ancient Greek writers who offer you consolation.
Not the Greek, it's actually Livy, Livius' Second Punic War, about Hannibal and Fabius Maximus Cunctator, the one who, it was his, an ugly byword, an epitheton ornans, or in this way, not a decorative, but to put him down, the one who was cowardly hesitant, who as a coward always withdrew and lured Hannibal into his doom by attrition, war by attrition. So, and I have the feeling, although he was derided all through history until today, he's still the greatest of all heroes. And it's good when I'm in trouble making a film, and when it's really getting bad, I read Livy, Second Punic War. So, but that's my private thought. Or sometimes the book of Job, Hiob, book of Job in the Bible. All the misfortunes that come upon one single man. And it's...
How does it help you?
It helps me because they had it even worse than I could ever have. And it's strange because I used to attract disasters. In Signs of Life, the leading actor that you see in the film on this fortress on the island of Kos had an accident where he fell 2 meters from a wall and he broke his heel bone, which is very critical because all the kinetic force of walking on the heel bone, and for 6 months he could not really move. And when he came back, we had to interrupt shooting for 6 months, and he came back with a big, complicated mechanical apparatus all the way up to his hip. We could film him only from his hip upwards. And 3 weeks before we started shooting, there was a military coup d'etat, of all things. So it's out of the blue, and borders were closed, no flights, no trains, nothing. My shooting permit's not valid anymore.
No, but I mean, things happen. I mean, I don't know if you noticed today the weather in Athens. I'm quite convinced that it has something to do. Well,
the
with
storm,
you.
yes, you have to brave the storm. In Greek, there's a nice proverb: "O kapitanios phenetes στην fortuna." The captain somehow emerges, shows when there's a real storm.
I remember last time when Werner was in New York reading at a bookstore, just before he started just before you spoke, there was thunder and lightning.
But a real one.
But a real one. No. But today was pretty real. I mean, I knew I was in Athens with Werner.
Let's go back.
No, but let's move on.
Yeah, let's
move on to Landscapes of the Soul. I want to read a little passage and then get to.
You're reading from.
I'm reading from a book that I think is quite remarkable. It's a book of conversations that Werner had with Paul Cronin. It's called A Guide for the Perplexed.
The title is stolen from the Jewish medieval philosopher Maimonides. His title is almost identical, but it's such a beautiful title, A Guide for the Perplexed, that I had to take it. I couldn't help it.
Sometimes you need to steal, but here I'm going to read a passage of it. I never present literal landscapes in my films. What I show instead are landscapes of the mind, locales of the soul. Just as there is no such thing as background music in my films, landscapes aren't picturesque or scenic backdrops as they are in Hollywood, nor merely representations of physical space. Most directors exploit landscapes only to embellish what is happening in the foreground, which is one reason why I like some of John Ford's films. He never used Monument Valley as a backdrop. For Ford, it signified the American soul and the very spirit of his characters. Westerns are all about basic notions of justice. And when I see Monument Valley, I somehow start to believe in American justice.
Well, we have to say today, when I look at Guantanamo Bay, for example, I have my doubts. So do not take it all as it is what was recorded by Paul Cronin. Sometimes, of course, you have afterthoughts and you start to reflect again. So things are not always hewn in stone, but the general remark about landscapes comes correctly, yes.
And I think also the passage about Ford remains. And you end that moment by saying, when I write a script, I often describe landscapes I have never seen. Although I had never been to Peru before I started making Aguirre, I imagined the atmosphere with a strange precision. And when I arrived in the jungle for the first time, everything was exactly as I had pictured it. It was as if the landscape had no choice. They had to fit my imagination and submit themselves to my idea of what they should look like. Although sometimes I struggle to find actual environments that match those in my head, I'm good at reshaping physical landscapes and making them operative for a film. They always somehow adapt themselves to the situations required of them. Often I try to introduce a certain atmosphere into a landscape, using sound and vision to give it a definite character. The fact is, and this I particularly like, the fact is that I can direct landscapes, just as I do actors and animals.
It's correct, yes. And there's a very fine example from Heart of Glass.
Yeah.
With the racing clouds. I don't know whether we should show it right away, but we should speak about how very often in the general perception, and also by fairly intelligent people who believe, because it's a very superficial look at what I'm doing in my films, they believe that I must be a German romantic. No, I'm not. That's the last thing that would be on my mind. And because of, yes, of course, there is sometimes a distant echo of romantic paintings, but romanticism does not belong to that time alone, to the romantics alone. When I look, for example, at landscapes 35,000 years ago, I shot a film in the Chauvet cave, which was discovered like a time capsule some 20 years ago. And the most incredible cave paintings. The film is called, what is the title of the film? The Caves. Cave of Forgotten Dreams. Yeah.
Cave of Forgotten Dreams.
And what is significant, there's a beautiful gorge in these rocks. And at the most spectacular place, there's a bridge of natural rock over it. And it exists since 100,000 years, roughly. And I think Cro-Magnon man, 32,000 years ago, had a sense for this type of landscape, romantic landscapes, or landscapes of the soul. I would be cautious in calling them romantic landscapes, but romanticism does not belong to the romantics alone. And this is why we have, can we show...
We can, but before we show Segers, I just want to say, when people, and Caspar Hauser, when one of the, it angers you greatly when people call you romantic. Whilst at the same time, there are certain romantic writers who are very close to your heart. And I'm thinking particularly of someone like Hölderlin.
But he's not romantic, you see. That's an interesting thing that we have the Goethe and Schiller and whatever, the classics, and then we have the romantics. But there are some leftovers, some writers, the best of their time, the best of the best that are never forgotten. Goethe and Schiller will disappear in the abyss of history. They are already almost forgotten. Nobody plays their pieces in theaters anymore. We do not read Goethe anymore without a shiver of, we shouldn't read that. We should rather read Kleist, who was not Kleist Büchner, who is 20th century, and Hölderlin, who is 22nd, 23rd century. So they are not belonging to that time. So in
a way you want to rescue them from that.
Yes, from the notion, and I have to rescue them from you if you say romantic writers like Hölderlin. No, he's not. He's absolutely not. By the way, completely sometimes deranged language, where somebody who literally became insane and lived for 35 years until the end of his life in insanity, locked away in a tower in Tübingen. And he writes with a depth and an insight going to the very last frontiers of my language, German. But then at the borderlines, the language starts to disintegrate. Many of his poems are fragments where there's only one word 5 lines down, and there's one isolated word, then half a second sentence, then a piece of the poem again, and then it disappears, it loses itself. So it's very, very fascinating how somebody goes to the very, very borderlines of language. And that's not a romantic notion.
Yeah, I don't Werner, feel that I particularly need to be saved on this issue. But I think that Hölderlin is often misread.
Of course, yes.
And misread because one wants to fit him in some kind of a school.
And that's a problem.
You and I once had a conversation about one sentence in Hölderlin, which I think of on a daily basis, which is, "The poet must not avert his eyes."
No, that's my line.
Is it yours?
It's not Hölderlinia. No, sometimes I ascribe certain things to poets or so. For example, there's a film I made during the fires in Kuwait, where every single oil well was burning. It's an apocalyptic landscape, and I wanted to have an apocalyptic feeling. And the film starts before you see the first image. There's a written 2-line text, and it says, the collapse of the stellar universe will occur like creation in grandiose splendor, and under it Blaise Pascal. It sounds very much like Blaise Pascal, but of course I invented it, and Pascal couldn't have written it any better than I did. And so I become inventive, and I do things that you normally do not do in movies. But
to create a feeling.
To create a cosmic sort of feeling, you step into the film at a very high level. And in the cosmos out there, it doesn't look pleasant at all. And people found it very funny that I'm saying, for example, in the film about Timothy Treadwell, Grizzly Man, when he speaks about the wild nature as if it was Walt Disney who created wild nature, that you have to hug a bear and you have to sing songs to a bear. No, this is counterproductive. The bear actually ate him at the end. And no, it's actually not funny, because nobody should die like that. And besides, his girlfriend was also killed and eaten by a bear. But he was always speaking about the harmony of the universe, and that everything was beautiful and nice, and the wild nature was fluffy and kind to us. No, it's not like that. And I'm saying in my commentary voice, here I differ with Treadwell. For me, nature is chaotic, hostile, and murderous. And that's what you see when you look at the cosmos out there. There is no such thing as the harmony of spheres, which actually is a concept of Greek philosophy. The Pythagoreans started in, Aristotle picked it up later, all the way to Kepler. All the way to Kepler, as if there were spheres and there was a harmony. The stars, moon stars, were somehow humming or giving a sound that created a harmony inaudible for human ears, which I find very interesting because there's much outside of our hearing and our vision. And
I want to show some of those images that are particularly important to you. If we could look in sequence.
Or shall we look first at what I don't think I am, number 13 and number 14.
Sure.
First, number 13.
You see,
that's Caspar David Friedrich, The Wanderer. This is a very beautiful, and that's really a landscape of the soul. Can we see number 14? The monk by the monk at the sea, also a very, very beautiful image. Can we see number 12? That's Martin, British, number 11. Yes, some beautiful, incredible, invented landscapes that have a phenomenal quality. But I would like to point out to who is really important for me, Hercules Segers, number 10. Here, Hercules Segers, that's early Rembrandt time. And he was not much taken seriously by anyone. Actually, he died an alcoholic in poverty, and nobody cared about him. And what is left of him is only something like 100 small prints. He experimented with prints. And I think only Rembrandt, of his contemporary, the young Rembrandt, took him seriously and bought a canvas painting, which now is at the Uffizi. And Rembrandt painted some additional things into it, an ox cart and some clouds. So Rembrandt wanted to improve Hercules Segers' image. It's kind of an interesting concept. And but Segers then did things that are completely outside of the canon of his time, and landscapes that are very, very close to my heart. But they were done in the 1620s, or 1610, 1620s. Can we see 04? That's picture 04, please. And yes, that's...
And in many ways, it's connected to what I read before about Peru, that in some way, the landscape, you recognized it before you saw it. And in the case of Segers, what is so interesting that you told me the other day is that he never saw a mountain.
Yeah, he never left Holland. He never saw a mountain, he never saw rocks. But it's an invented landscape, and it's very staged.
Of the soul, in that way.
Could we see number 5? We just rattle a few of them down. Just very beautiful. Number 6, please. Here you still have some idea of landscape. Number 7, which is my all-time favorite, or one of my all-time favorites. It's phenomenal that this was done 400 years before its time. Only in the 20th century you have seen things like this. Can we see 08, which is also very, very intense and visionary. And number 9. No, number 9 is, I think, is that the one? Yes, okay. Sure, you can even recognize a church or something, but here the rock and the sky, they start to come apart. There's something a little bit that reminds me of Hölderlin.
And can we see clip number 9, please?
Which one? Okay.
Just works so beautifully. And I think it's important for you to tell the story about Kinski wanting his fighting with the landscape.
Am Morgen las ich die Messe, dann stiegen wir durch die Wolken hinab.
Yeah, okay. This is from Agere, The Wrath of God, the opening shot. And you see, it's very staged and it's very stylized. And it is a clear landscape of the soul.
And they're echoes of sagas. They're echoes of what you had seen.
In a way, my tribute to Hercules Sagas. In a way, yes.
You would say that.
Yes.
And Kinski didn't take well to this.
Well, Kinski is not in the first shot. I took him out because he was screaming at me. He wanted to be in close-up in front of the whole army and always his face. And he said to me, you idiot, you crétin, you whatever. The human face is the greatest landscape for any filmmaker. And I said, no, it is not. And he wanted to have, this was actually shot in Peru near Machu Picchu. And it's a ecstatic mountain opposite of the ruins of Machu Picchu. And you all probably have seen the postcards of Machu Picchu with the ruins in the foreground and then the entire sugarloaf-shaped mountain in the background. And he wanted to have that. And I said, no, this is only a postcard. This is what a commercial would do for a television commercial would do it that way. And he was even more angry, and I took him out of this shot because I wanted to have an excerpt of the landscape which has a strange ecstasy, something that is outside, where landscape steps outside of itself, where landscape becomes like a fever dream, like an imaginary landscape. And of course, what you see, people coming down there, it is not reality. It is something like an elevated, an ecstasy of reality. There's something particular about it.
And you caught a moment which was extraordinary, a natural moment with those clouds.
Yes, it was a terrible day, all in clouds and raining, and you couldn't see a thing. And then when everybody was completely exhausted and couldn't take it any longer, all of a sudden the clouds opened and they stood on one side of the mountain. And then we shot this only once. You can do such a thing only once. 450 people coming down, and llamas and cannons and all pigs, all sorts of things. And it's too steep, too slippery, and quite a few people had vertigo. They would, and it was always the people from the highlands, strangely enough. We had native people, Quechua-speaking people who came from an altitude over 4,000 meters. And they had vertigo, 5, 6, 7. I tied them with a rope to a bush, and I said, we bring you down later when the shot is done. So you have to be physical when you do something like this. And it's always physical experience with landscapes. And yet something really doomed. When you see this shot, you immediately get the feeling that this army descending there is doomed. They all disappear without a trace at the end of the film.
No wonder that word doom spoke to you.
Yes, of course it was.
It came.
Yeah, and I describe certain things of the landscape that I had never seen. I had no real idea how jungle really looked like. And I learned very quickly how to give it a quality of fever dreams, and how to translate that onto a screen is a strange and complex phenomenon, and I cannot fully describe how I do it. And sometimes I have minor conflicts with cinematographers, because I want to stylize it in a certain way, and they want to do it in a conventional way.
They want to make landscape look beautiful.
Yes, and whenever there's a sunset, and I notice that the sunset is behind my actors, I turn it 180 degrees away from the sunset so that the cinematographer who loves the sunset in the background doesn't get it. There's never a sunset in any of my films. Not completely correct. I think once there's a sunset.
I think it's a good moment to bring up a recent experience you had in Switzerland, where you went to the CERN. It's interesting because it seems to have struck you in important ways.
I was invited to CERN, to the Large Hadron Collider by scientists. And I could see a lot because the Hadron Collider and all the main cyclotrons are in repair and refurbishing and upgrading. So for 2 years, they have them sitting idle, and you can really see them and walk around. And the scientists really tell you, those who do these experiments, that the cosmos out there is not just unfriendly, it's so hostile that we cannot even imagine it. And just recently, a week ago, we saw the first photo of a black hole, which was a very complex sort of array of telescopes around the world who combined their observations at the same moment and had to be arranged into one image. And what's out there is so phenomenally unfriendly, so phenomenally hostile, that it's even beyond our imagination. And it's just extraordinary, and the kind of tools that they are using is really wonderful for me to see and to understand. For example, when they have a collision of two particles, and they have detectors, and the particles crash into each other with extreme energies very close to the speed of light. And the events are taking place in extreme short times. So they make their observations in milliseconds or less than milliseconds. And what really struck me is that they record a millisecond with their computers and in their detectors. A millisecond is 1,000th of a second. And what they record, the data they record in 1,000th of a second, records more data than every single library in the world put together into 1 millisecond. And it's really going to limits of what we can do, and I find it extraordinary.
And that may be one of the reasons that it interests you so much, because it goes to the limit of what we can understand, of what we can fathom.
But we can understand very simple things. For example, I was always interested in time, that present does not exist. There's only past and future. You see, when I reach out for the glass and I lift it, when I touch it, it's already the past. It happened in the past second, and I lift it up. That's also past already when I drink from it. And there's only left is the future. You can bring it down more and more. The last millimeter before I touch a glass is already past. And the very first moment when I touch a glass is already past.
So where does that leave us?
It leaves us with the notion that you can explain that to a Cro-Magnon man, somebody 30,000 years ago. You do not need to be a scientist. Where it does leave us is that we understand that human perception of time is an illusion. It is an illusion. We only have past and future. And every child and every Aborigine in Australia who has not done science will understand that. It's as simple as that. And yet our perception of time, we have now machinery that records time to fractions of seconds, and it's 1 by the power of -14, meaning 0 point and then 14 zeros, 1 second. It's a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second can be recorded. And when you ask, why do we need to do that? The answer is very simple. The world out there, you including, probably most of you including, are asking Boulder, Colorado, which has its most precise atomic clock, more than 1 billion times per minute for the right time, because all our GPS measuring has to do with time, how much time it takes to reach a satellite and reach a moving car, because an object in moving slows time down. And that's and they can measure it to such details that are almost impossible to imagine. And what they tell you is, according to Einstein, and it can be proven in practical terms, when I have my wristwatch here and I move it away from a huge mass, the mass of Earth, planet Earth, and I move it away from the center of the Earth, only 1 meter, just moving my wristwatch, it will go slower, but by the tiniest trillions of trillions of trillions of a second, and they can measure it. They can measure today how much slower my wristwatch is moving because I move it away from a big mass. It is measurable now. And I find it very, very fascinating.
Do you find that in all these attempts to measure, we're also losing something of our humanity?
Not really, because GPS is something very useful, and orientation in space and orientation.
Do you think people with the GPS still know how to find their way on a map?
They don't, and I have never used a GPS myself, and I'm using maps, and I have a very good sense for directions. So it's, but that comes when you travel on foot, that you understand, you read landscapes, you read the obstacles, you read distances much better than using GPS. I would not say that we are losing, we are actually understanding much more about the universe out there. What is the fate of the universe? How badly is our planet ending at some time in the far, far, far future? How bad is it really looking out there? And how stupid and inappropriate is an idea to colonize another planet like Mars? It's fine that we are going there with a space probe as scientists, fine, but you do not colonize Mars after you have depleted our planet Earth from fresh water and breathable air and vegetables that are growing, and when we have grazed like locust, everything empty, then we move on to the next one. You see, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't contemplate it. We should keep our planet inhabitable. That should be our effort. And the colonization of Mars is a technical utopia anyway. The same way the 20th century has given us, has shown us the demise and has been the manifestation of the demise of social utopias like communism and like socialism. And so the dream paradise on earth, it all crumbled and fell. And our century will inevitably bring the demise of technological utopias. Immortality, for example, it's an absurd idea which will be put to rest while this century is still going on. In the next 80 years, it will be, nobody will speak about it anymore. in the next 70, 80 years, nobody will speak about colonization of Mars anymore, or traveling to other stars. They're simply too far, or contact with extraterrestrials. Fine, yes, we won't make contact because if ever a signal is coming at us, it will take 220 million years until our answer comes back. Or it will be 180,000 only years until our answer reaches them.
A bit too late.
If they too late, and they won't speak English anyway. And they may be very slimy and strange creatures.
I remember a conversation we had many, many years ago, which we entitled, "Was the 20th Century a Mistake?"
A mistake, yes.
What title would we give to this century now?
Well, I think what's interesting is to contemplate the future, the assault of the future upon the rest of the time.
Say more.
Let's leave it like that, the assault of the future upon the rest of the time. We had some good titles like Ecstasy and Terror in the Mind of God. Yeah.
No. And when we came up with this title, I said to Werner, maybe we should say a little bit more. And he said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Let them figure it out. So figuring out a little bit more landscapes of the soul, the relationship between imagination and childhood, what the relationship might be between landscapes of the soul and imagination. I'm thinking particularly of something you once described to me, and I think now with my Hölderlin quotation, which is yours, I'm a bit worried, but you once described to me your first experience eating an orange when you were 5 or 6 years old, and how amazing of a landscape an orange was to you at that age.
Sure, yes, oranges didn't exist. We had no running water, we had electricity sometimes. We had no cinema, I didn't know what cinema was. I didn't know what an orange was, and I was in hospital when I was 6 or so for a week, and they gave me an orange and I didn't know what it was. And it took me a day until I figured out that you had to peel it, and then there are these segments inside, and I took the skin off, and there are these tiny little pieces that are aligned and hold the thing together, and I studied it for a long time, and it was like a strange universe, something, and I had the feeling it could be eaten. And I tried very, very carefully to suck on it a little bit, and it was tasty. But first experience of the world was something else. My mother ripped my older brother and me out of bed in the middle of the night. It was still winter. And she carried us up on the slope, and she said, "Boys, I had to wake you up. The city of Rosenheim is burning." It was just in the last days of the war, and I must have been just 2.5 years old, and I remember it. At the end of the valley, the sky, since Rosenheim is 40 kilometers away, you didn't see fire or so. The entire night sky was illuminated red and orange, and it was slowly pulsing. And this pulsing light I always remember very vividly. And it made me curious about the world, and I knew the world out there was dangerous. The entire city was burning, and I didn't even know what a city was, but I knew it was many people in many houses, and an entire city was burning. So, and of course that's a mythical image that makes you curious about what is the world about, where are the dangers, what is going on here. And of course behind this little farmhouse where we lived was a creek, and then a ravine and a waterfall, which was a very mythical sort of waterfall, very savage, very, very ancient. Never any tourists went there. You couldn't see it from outside. You had to climb in a ravine, and then you saw the waterfall. So those are elements that, in a way, shaped my understanding of images, of landscapes that have certain qualities, that have certain elements of a child's soul.
And they come back to haunt you now?
Yes, not haunting me, but I enjoy to discover landscapes and shape them and detect things in the landscapes that nobody else would search for or find. I remember in Antarctica I did a film, Encounters at the End of the World, and there's something very, very strange under the very South Pole. I think we have a clip of that. Do we? Shall we show that one? It is...
I think it's number 12.
No, number 7, Encounters.
No, it's number 7.
Frozen.
Yeah.
Number 7. Number 7. Can we show number 7, please? And when we are gone, what will happen thousands of years from now in the future? Will there be alien archaeologists from another planet trying to find out what we were doing at the South Pole? They will descend into the tunnels that we had dug deep under the pole. It is still minus 70 degrees here, and that's why this place has outlived all the large cities in the world. They walk on and on. And then this, as if we had wanted to leave one remnant of our presence on this planet, they would find a frozen sturgeon, mysteriously hidden away beneath the mathematically precise true South Pole. Stash it back away into its frozen shrine for another eternity. And then they find more memories of a world once green. As if the human race wanted to preserve at least some lost beauty of this earth, they left this, framed in a garland of frozen popcorn. So, yes, it's a very strange find, and nobody else being at the South Pole would look out. I heard that there was a frozen sturgeon somewhere very deep in the ice. Somebody from the kitchen apparently stole it and put it in a shrine and put a frozen garland of popcorn around it. So it's the human imagination is very strange sometimes, and I try to find these images. I try to make it my own, and I reflect myself in those. Actually, when I say the mathematical, precise, true South Pole, since the ice on the South Pole is about 3 kilometers thick, and it's moving 1 or 2 meters each year. Probably by today it's something like 15 or 20 meters off the very mathematical South Pole. It's shifting. The ice is actually moving and drifting towards the ocean. And it's the kind of strangeness that sounds and looks very familiar to me.
As if it had been there for a very long time.
Yes, and it will stay for a very long time. If they leave the sturgeon in this shrine, it will probably be discovered by archaeologists of the future. 5,000 years from now, they might be, or aliens may come and discover the frozen sturgeon, and they have to figure out what to do with it. And this whole concept of alien is in a way very fascinating for me, because out there I don't think there's much of aliens out there, although we know that there are exoplanets or inhabitable, quite many inhabitable places for life forms. And we can assume that somewhere there is life. But life in forms that we do not know how it looks like, maybe microbes, maybe bacteria, maybe even strange snails, or you do not know what. And we can assume that there is some life out there because we share the same history with the universe, we share the same physics, and we share the same chemistry with the universe. So there's a probability that's there that there's, but I don't find it that interesting. We can assume, yes, there are some life forms out there. We will never reach it because it's too far. Everything out there where you find inhabitable planets somewhere in our galaxy is at least 25,000 light years away, or 400 or 4,000 light years, which means you have to travel hundreds of thousands of years, which you cannot as a human being.
It doesn't interest you that much. I think it probably would be a correct assumption to make that what interests you perhaps more is a return to the past. I remember when we spoke once about the inheritance you felt you received from your grandfather, the archaeologist.
Yeah.
You spoke very movingly about Thucydides, and particularly the Melian dialogue.
Yeah, well, but I spoke about it. The Melos, the dialogue between Athens and the island of Melos in Thucydides is something which was very appropriate and almost a copy of what happened with Greek monetary crisis. The forces from outside, including, unfortunately, Germany, who didn't play a very elegant role in all this, superimposing on, like the Athenians on the island of Melos, enforcing their rules and enforcing their supremacy, and so not very pleasant. And I pointed out, yes, we can look into the past and find some startling similarities. When you look into conquest of New Spain, of the Americas, Cortés, yeah, and later, of course, Pizarro, and there's some sort of a symmetry of myth for the Aztecs, the Spaniards arriving, were some creatures that descended from the clouds, godlike creatures who rode on miraculous stags, meaning on horses, and they had firearms that created thunder and lightning that killed off their men, their soldiers. So, and they believed there were gods that descended from the clouds, predicted actually in some ancient predictions. And the symmetry of this myth included also the Spaniards. The Spaniards, when they saw the Valley of Mexico, which still was a lake at that time, and they descended between the two volcanoes, Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl, and they saw it, and Bernal Díaz del Castillo, a footman of Cortés, he writes in his wonderful book, The Conquest of New Spain, he writes that they were marveling and stopped as if this was out of a fairy tale, as if it was out of the book of Amadis. some sort of late medieval fairy tales, invented cities, celestial cities, invented cities. So there was a certain symmetry of myth. And I believe that it was actually probably not Cortés, because today I tried to find it. The instructions that he had, I think, included that he had to look out for the fountain of youth, which actually is not in the instructions. I have to look into Columbus. I think the instructions for Columbus was, if you find land, look out for the fountain of youth. And those were the official instructions for him, among other things. Converting the natives to the true faith. And actually I'm planning a film on meteorites, which may contain some life forms like bacteria or monocellular structures. What if an alien landed here, and there's a scientist who is actually a priest in the Vatican, and we want to ask him, if an alien steps in front of you, like out of Star Wars with little antenna there and a screechy little voice, would you baptize him? It really interests me. What does the church tell us? How do we deal with the alien?
Why does this interest you?
Because it interests me, because we baptized the alien that came across the Western world when Columbus discovered some islands in the Bahamas. And they immediately baptized and raped and took the gold. So that's a very, very strange encounter. So there were always murderous and strange, and in a way, I can't describe it what it is, but it captures my imagination. What is it that's so strange, what we are doing with the alien?
Each time we talk, Werner, it seems to me more and more that your interests, the depths of your interest, lie firmly in an appreciation and an understanding of history.
Not only it's.
I know I would be corrected, but still.
Yes, sure. History is always something that's totally fascinating, but exploring the world and understanding and reading the world right, to understand what is going on and how the world is shaped and what is going on, where do we live, what is our environment.
I know, because
and that's in a way
no, I want you to read that, but I know when we saw each other in Los Angeles, and our current president gave his speech to the nation, you were angry at me for not having heard it, for not having listened to it. And you said to me, how can you possibly, understand the world at the present time if you don't pay attention to that?
Sure, and I pay attention to the bizarre things that you see on television. I look at the most bizarre sometimes, at some game shows, or I look at WrestleMania, or I look at what is Trump saying to the general public. I'm fascinated by what is going on, and you must not avert your eyes. The poet must not avert his eyes.
As Holdengräber would say.
As I would say. And not averting your eyes and looking at the world as it is, in all its strangeness and cruelty and in its marvel. And that's where a quality comes into my films, a quality of awe, of something that illuminates us, something that strikes us. I've never seen anything like this.
That's sublime in some way.
Yes, sometimes it elevates us into recognition of something that comes close to truth. which has always been very important to me. What is truth? And we cannot describe it, and nobody knows exactly except the Pope. There's some sort of the truth of faith, but I would not fully buy it. I buy it when I look at medieval mystics, late medieval mystics, who experienced certain truth and certain illuminations in ecstasies. And this is why I've termed the expression ecstasy of truth, the ecstatic truth. But sometimes it's just the very normal, terrifying look at the world as it is. And there's sometimes a strange terror and strange illumination in it. And Conquest of the Useless is full of it.
Why don't you read it? So also you hear Werner's prose here. I want you to hear these two passages.
It is Pucallpa in Peru in the jungle, 7th of July 1980. An entire school of small fishes leaped out of the water as our boat passed. I saw a stuffed alligator. I actually saw it. It's not like the frozen sturgeon. I saw it. I saw a stuffed alligator standing upright, supported by its tail and singing to the accompaniment of a guitar. The alligator was also wearing sunglasses. A young man was holding 5 small alligators by the head and wanted to sell them to me. At first I thought they were dead because they were drooping, but it was probably from exhaustion, because the seller insisted on demonstrating how much life was left in them by holding his lit cigarette lighter to their tails, which made them writhe like snakes. A young woman was sucking a newborn piglet that had been orphaned. Once the pigs are fully grown, saddlebags are hitched on their backs for loads, and then off they go. That's pure invention in this case. The Indian women like gold teeth. The powers of heaven are powerless against the jungle. The night was quiet. Only the stars sang far off. A few stars came shooting down. Wagner, a naked little Indian boy with a distended stomach, not yet able to speak, was pushed toward me among the silent observers. Another child, about 5, asked whether I wanted him. Little Wagner did not have either a father or a mother, only his shadow. So it's just looking at what the world is all about, and it's with a very few moments that the pigs are saddled with saddlebags and off they go into the distance. All the rest is precise observation, which all of a sudden is interspersed with fantasy. But I remember the little boy naked and with a big belly, because he had apparently he was undernourished, and they wanted to sell him to me and give him to me to adopt him, whether I wanted little, and his name was Wagner, like Richard Wagner. It's very, very beautiful and strange.
So, shall we show the last scene of Aguirre?
Okay, yes, because it's, let's show it.
I think so.
Yeah, okay. And it is number, you have to give us a number here.
It's number 10.
Okay.
Wenn wir das Meer erreichen, werden wir ein größeres Schiff bauen und damit nach Norden segeln und Trinidad der spanischen Krone entreißen.
Should we show Icelandic età?
Von da aus werden wir weiter segeln und Cortés Mexiko wegnehmen.
We have no subtitles.
Was für ein großer Verrat wird das sein? ganz Neuspanien in der Hand haben. Und wir werden Geschichte inszenieren, wie andere Stücke auf dem Theater.
This means that Italy wants to establish, take everything like Trinidad away from the Spanish crown, and together we will stage history like other stage plays in the theatre. And everybody is back on board. And we have over 400 little monkeys. That's a long story. Let's not talk about that. That was a wonderful, wild story. And of course, that can be filmed only once.
Der Zorn Gottes. Werde meine eigene Tochter heiraten.
I will marry my own daughter.
Und mit ihr die reinste Dynastie gründen.
And form the purest dynasty that Earth has ever seen together.
Werden wir über diesen ganzen Kontinent herrschen.
We will rule over this entire continent.
Wir halten durch.
We will hold out.
Ich bin der Zorn Gottes.
I am the wrath of God.
Wer sonst ist mit mir?
Who else is with me? The sound can be louder now a little bit here. Well, this landscape, which is only a fever dream now, and inhabited only instead of human beings, there's only little monkeys left and dead human beings on this raft. It has its quality, I think, not only the image of the landscape in the monkeys and the strangeness, but also the strangeness of speech. It has to do how language transforms a landscape into something like a fever dream. And that's something that I have learned over the years as a filmmaker, how to declare, make certain declarations that all of a sudden intensify a landscape, and I've done it quite often. It's a common.
It's a common denominator.
You find it quite often. Of course, my films are a lot of storytelling and a lot of events and acting and music and whatever. By the way, it's not only speech; it's all the music that transforms what we are seeing here.
You, in Conquest of the Useless, you write passionately about these fever dreams.
Yes, I do, but they are not always just fever dreams. They are They're what I see, and it sounds like a fever dream, but I've actually seen it. I've seen it and experienced it.
That doesn't make it less of a fever dream.
That's correct, yes. But I have a way to discover. I have a way to discover the certain essence of a situation, of a landscape, of a character. And that's fundamentally what is going on in real cinema. And you do not see it that often when you look at movies of the film industry, like Hollywood. They are into different things. Yes, they actually are very much now into these fantasy films, meaning it's pure imaginations, flying dragons. And
are you against them?
No. It's they are actually going back to forms of narrations and elements of storytelling that we have in Beowulf, for example, and that we have in old Nordic sagas, and that we have all the way back to Roman and Greek antiquity. But it's mostly very much what you see are elements of 9th, 10th, 11th or so century in the Germanic world. That means elves, dragons, evil dwarves. You just name it.
And I remember one day when you read all the dwarfs.
Yeah, in the Poetic Edda. It's a wonderful. I highly recommend you have to read the Poetic Edda, which was collected. These poems were collected in the 12th, 13th century, but they date back to much earlier times. They date back to the 5th. Some of it refers to events in the 5th, 6th century, or maybe because it's an oral tradition, maybe even deeper into time. We do not know. And in one of the very first thing is the vision of the seeress. The prophecy of the seeress. All of a sudden, the poem starts to name the dwarfs, and then the dwarfs were created, and they were named, and then it's verse after verse, names of dwarfs, over 80 names of dwarfs, which are the most incredible rapper song when you read it quickly, and it's just incredible. And some of the scholars thought that this was an interpolation and doesn't belong there, and took it out and put it in an appendix. So I think it's wrong, which is not
an abomination.
It's an abomination. They are too much into academia, and they should be banished from ever touching the Edda. I have touched it. I actually touched it twice in my life. I had it. It's like the Dead Sea Scrolls for Israel. What Iceland has is.
I remember. We were invited once to go to Iceland. Do you remember what you said? You said, "I will go under one condition, that we speak for 5 consecutive hours."
Yeah.
One day we'll do it. We won't speak for five more hours, I promise you. But Werner,
maybe we can show.
Maybe I think the final clip we should show is Into the Inferno, or not.
Is that with the Icelandic?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, let's show that.
I think we should
Which
show that.
number is this?
And then I have one.
Number 12.
I have one bonus at the very
can
end.
we show number 12?
Yeah.
That's actually Iceland, and I'm reciting some of the Poetic Edda. And it's a way I'm speaking, I'm reciting, because I have some sort of my own stage voice. And I do have my own voice when I'm playing, for example, a villain.
You love playing a villain.
In Jack Reacher or other things now in the new Mandalorian, in the continuation of the Star Wars, I play a small role. And again there, I'm not the baddest bad guy, but somehow a sinister character, and I'm good at that. and the kind of voice.
But you enjoy playing the bad guy.
Of course, because I'm good. I'm good as a bad guy. On camera, I mean on the screen. Otherwise, I'm a very friendly person. In private, yeah. My wife will testify that I'm a fluffy husband. But we should...
But I will say one thing. When you get home tonight and have trouble sleeping, I highly recommend to you one thing. I asked Werner to do a voiceover once of a, so to speak, children's book called, I think I can say it here.
They're grown-ups here.
They're grown-up. I mean, you know, in America you would have to put ... but I'll say it here and with great pleasure.
Book with that title.
Yeah, Go the Fuck to Sleep. And it's a father who just can't get his children to go the fuck to sleep. So
and it's a rant against
the cows come and the mountains and the moon and go the fuck to sleep and it goes on. Just listen to it. I
recited it for you, yes.
Yeah, you did it for me. I played it in the dark before an event on that book. I highly recommend you go home, put yourself under blankets, and play it quite loud. Yeah. It might not do the right effect.
And here the clip is from Into the Inferno.
Number 12.
Fairly recent film, clip number 12. And I'm reading from the Poetic Edda.
I'm so glad we show this. It's too important not to.
These primordial occurrences influence
I have just one thing.
Icelanders. There is a text that defines the spirit of the people. It exists only in a single manuscript.
The sound is a bit
for Iceland, it is as important as the Dead Sea Scrolls are for Israel. The Codex was given as a present to the King of Denmark by an Icelandic bishop in the 17th century, hence its name, the Royal Codex or Codex Regius. In 1971, Denmark returned it to Iceland. Knowing that it constituted the soul of the country, the Codex was put on Denmark's largest battleship and escorted by a whole fleet. No amount of money in the world would be enough to purchase this manuscript from Iceland, although it is battered and crumpled and filled with holes. In the opening passage called The Prophecy of the Seeress, there is an apocalyptic vision of the end of the pagan gods. This seems to describe a huge volcanic event. Neath the sea, the land sinketh, the sun dimmeth, from the heavens fall the fair bright stars, gusheth forth steam and gutting fire, to very heaven soar the hurtling flames. The fates I fathom, yet farther I see, of the mighty gods the engulfing doom. Comes the darksome dragon flying, Nithhog, upwards from the Nitha fells. He bears in his pinions, as the plains he overflies, naked corpses. Now he will sink.
That landscape is just so extraordinary.
Yeah, it's very beautiful and terrifying, and of course we know that it's under us everywhere, even under the seabeds. It's all what you see here. At some points it's erupting and it becomes visible, and I like to see where it becomes visible, because it has this sense of awe, the sense of wonder. And actually in the film itself I'm commenting it in a way that National Geographic would never ever allow. They would take the film away from me. At the end my commentary says, while I'm showing this kind of lava flows and explosions, and so I'm saying this lava, this burning, glowing magma is everywhere under us, under all continents, under the seabeds, and this ferocious, hostile nature is completely uninterested. And then I'm saying, in scurrying roaches, retarded reptiles, and vapid humans alike. And I love to say things like that.
I know you do.
Yeah,
and you know, I know you do.
Do not hear it in National Geographic.
I know you do. And before Werner reads the final passage, two things. Because you love saying such things, and you've loved saying them, I would say, possibly your entire life. One thing, you never visited the Acropolis, really.
No, I did. I actually did. It's very strange. It's hard to get me into a museum. I have a problem to get over the threshold, and I don't know exactly what it is. Maybe the kind of regulated awe, the kind of performative structure of a museum, and also I think Bob Dylan's in a song says that in the museum eternity is at trial, this kind of trial of eternity, which is also a worry of mine. And it's nobody believes me. As a young kid, when I was first time in Greece, when I was 16, 17, I always passed through Athens, and I would go to the island of Crete, or I would go to the island of Kos. And I always passed by and I saw the Acropolis, and I said, no, I'm not going up there. I'm not going up there. And I have no idea why. And I think 13 times I was in Athens, and only on the 14th time I went up to the Acropolis. But it was right after the military coup d'etat. And the borders were just opened, no flights yet, so I drove a car 2,200 kilometers from Munich. Day and night I drove. I slept 2 hours, falling on the passenger seat and slept. I arrived in Athens and it was 5 in the morning, just lights started to come up. And at that time you could park under the Acropolis in a car. And I parked and I said I should see it, but it opened only at 8. At 8 o'clock they opened, and I was the first one on the Acropolis. Hardly anyone came. But I was so tired, I sat between 2 of the columns and fell asleep. And I slept maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and then I was rudely woken up and expelled from the Acropolis by guards, because they thought I was a homeless, a hobo, a vagabond who wanted to sleep up there.
Would you go back?
I was back once, but briefly. But I saw the Acropolis this morning in the hail, and I thought this was wonderful. This was really good to see it. Thunder, lightning, hail, and the Acropolis there. It's just, and it was good to see it from down.
Orchestrated by you.
In a way, yes, I hope.
Let's look at clip number 20, and then Werner will do a reading.
Okay, what is 20? Oh, it's way too long.
Because it brings together also the 3 minutes.
It's an unfinished country. It's still prehistorical. The only thing that is lacking is the dinosaurs here. It's like a curse weighing on an entire landscape. And whoever goes too deep into this has his share of that curse. So we are cursed with what we are doing here. It's a land that God, if he exists, has created in anger. It's the only land where creation is unfinished yet. taking a close look at what's around us, there is some sort of a harmony. It is the harmony of overwhelming and collective murder. And we, in comparison to the articulate vileness and baseness and obscenity of all this jungle, we, in comparison to that enormous articulation, we only sound and look like badly pronounced and half-finished sentences out of a stupid suburban novel, a cheap novel. And we have to become humble in front of this overwhelming misery and overwhelming fornication, overwhelming growth, and overwhelming lack of order. Even the stars up here in the sky look like a mess. There is no harmony in the universe. We have to get acquainted to this idea that there is no real harmony as we have conceived it. But when I say this all full of admiration for the jungle. It is not that I hate it, I love it. I love it very much, but I love it against my better judgment.
Okay. Cut a little bit. It cut a little bit. It says, I love it against my better judgment.
Yeah. Well, the clip is from a film from Les Blanc, Burden of Dreams. He actually took the title from me. We spoke about titles, and he picked it up from me. To me, it only shows that I have been working for a long time. I was still a very young man when it was the time when I did Fitzcarraldo. And when you see photos when I did Signs of Life, I look like a schoolboy. And I have plowed on, and I have never looked really back. This is always strange when I look back at myself. I personally do not like it that much, but we are showing it here to an audience.
What don't you like about it?
I don't like self-reflection. You see, there are some animals, when you put a mirror at them, they immediately shy away and go away. There are animals who do not like their mirror image, and it's the same for me.
I know, and you and I have had a few conversations about psychoanalysis in that way.
Yeah. I think psychoanalysis is one, among other monumental mistakes, it's one of the monumental mistakes of the 20th century. Of course, it has its roots in the 19th or even before, but it has not done good to anyone. And I very much compared, it doesn't do good if we self-reflect ourselves, if we shed light into the deepest recesses of our souls. We shouldn't do that. It's unhealthy. And psychoanalysis is a monumental mistake. And in the same way, it is related. I keep comparing it with the Spanish Inquisition, where you were. No, it's a legitimate comparison, because in the Spanish Inquisition, in order to weed out remaining elements of Muslim faith from Spain after the Reconquest, you were forced, and sometimes forced under torture, to confess to the deepest elements of your faith. You had to explain, you had to do the auto da fe. You had to reveal the nature, the deepest nature of your religious belief. And it was equally disastrous. It hasn't done good to anyone, neither the inquisitors nor the tortured ones. So, and it's legitimate to take it as an example. And I keep thinking about a single hour in New York, for example, for a psychiatrist costs not under $200. And I keep thinking how many good steaks that would be. I would prefer the steaks instead of the psychiatrist. So I have to rant against them because I'm so much against what I see
Werner,
there.
when I proposed this idea of making the Onassis Foundation even more global and bringing it to Los Angeles, I said two things that came directly from you. One where you said that New York is essentially a city where they consume culture, and LA is a city where they create culture.
Yes, and not only culture, they also create, for example, in the perimeter of the city itself, the reusable rockets by SpaceX are being built in the town. Tesla cars, you have it all, computers, or let's say the internet started in Los Angeles.
You have a movie about that.
Yes, I did a movie, Lo and Behold.
But also the other line that has mattered to me greatly, and it is yours, this I do know, is when I asked you once what culture was, you said culture is a collective agitation of the mind.
Yes, it is, and you have to look behind the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, and then you would immediately understand. It's a city of great excitement about mathematics. It's a great excitement about literature, music. Things get done there. New ideas are tested and then spread out to the entire world, like the internet started there, like much of the computers, although that's further north, Silicon Valley, but video games. Collective dreams of the world in terms of the Hollywood cinema, not my cup of tea, but still it's created there. And all the idiocies, all the stupidities are from there, like the crazy sects like Scientology, or like yoga classes, or like aerobic studios, or like you just name it.
I remember last time you said breast implants.
Yeah, not only that. I mean, you see, it's terrible. If you go to a party in Los Angeles, you see total human installations, women with artificial breasts like this, and 25 facelifts, and men have started it as well now. It's very, very frightening.
It's so frightening, and I remember on one board I was on, some of the board members just, I wanted to ask them if they could blink.
They cannot,
No.
They cannot wink anymore, and they cannot laugh because the face is so stretched that they only have one robotic expression, and that's about it.
Werner, can you finish the evening by reading an uplifting page?
Okay, yes, let's go back to the time of Fitzcarraldo, and I actually returned to the place much later, some 20 years later, and I wanted to see what was left. We had cut a swath of jungle for moving the ship over a hill, and it was a heavy ship. It was a real steamboat in one single piece, and certain things in the drama of what was happening there, and drama, I mean drama of doing something that has never been done in technical history, an object of that size and of that weight in one single piece has never been moved over a mountain. So we had to invent, and I had to invent methods how to do it. Actually, Neanderthal or Neolithic methods how we did it. And in all the turmoil of running into a border war with between Peru and Ecuador, where my camp for 1,100 people was attacked and burned down, and we had 2 plane crashes, and we had the leading character falling ill after half the film was shot. And he was flown out, Jason Robards, he was flown out to the States, and his medical doctors wouldn't allow him to return to the jungle. So, and at that time, Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones was still part of the acting team. And I said to him, you have to go because we have only 3 weeks left on your contract. And even if I have a new actor tomorrow, it's not time enough to do everything with you. So he had to go on a world tour with the Rolling Stones. So there were massive, massive disasters. And then I returned and nothing, there was no trace of us. Not a single post. We had huts like the native people would have, and thatched roofs, and the floors were made of flexible bark, and there was not even a nail that you could find. Or where we had cut the jungle some 40, 50 meters wide, was completely overgrown again. You could not tell where it was. It was all of a sudden, everything that I did was reclaimed by forest and by rotting and by what nature does to us. And of course I had overlooked quite a few things. And of course what came to me was at that time, my last consolation was writing, was words. For others, last consolation would be either drugs or religion or whatever. For me, it was always words. It was texts. I dug myself into writing diaries.
And tiny, tiny.
At that time,
I wish I could show you now the most diminutive miniature handwriting.
Yeah, my handwriting is of totally normal size. But at that time it shrank to microscopic. And I had the sharpest pens imaginable, so that I could, for example, write 10, 12 pages of text on half a page of this book. So and you could only decipher it with a magnifying glass that jewelers, for example, are using. They have glasses and then they flip some magnifying thing and they look at diamonds. And like that, I could decipher it. And it took me 26 years until I was capable to even touch it and look into it and read it.
Partly for the reason you were mentioning of looking back.
No. I didn't want. I tried it once and I could read only a few pages. And it was such a horror for me that I said I will never read it. And my wife, who is actually sitting here, she said to me, you have to address it. You have to address it because when you are dead, some idiot will eventually get hold of the text and try to decipher it, and decipher it wrongly, and not edit a few things out that shouldn't be in it. And it would be a book of an idiot if you do not address it yourself. You have to do it. So 26 years after I wrote these texts, I went into it and all of a sudden it was very easy. It's completely easy, and I typed it out and of course deleted things and edited a few things. There's no doubt about that. And
so, thank you, Lena.
Yes, she's here and she has been a very good influence on those things. Here I read just towards the end. The Amehuacas, I was assured, had been contacted long since. There was actually an incident where an uncontacted tribe much further upstream, 10 days travel upstream in the mountains, they had refused any contact with white civilizations, and they had shot with very large arrows, 2 meters long arrows, and as they have no metal, with razor-sharp bamboo arrow tips, they had shot at 3 of our people who were native people who were further upstream doing fishing for us, and a man was shot through the throat, and the arrow head was still sticking through his throat. It had split his shoulder open and stuck in his throat and stuck in the other shoulder, so it rested there. And the woman was hit 3 arrows and survived. We had to operate them on the kitchen table in the middle of nowhere, because if we had transported them any further, they would have died inevitably. They were dying and we had to operate. And I was assisting operations with a torchlight illuminating the pelvis cavity of the woman that was operated on her abdomen. And with the other hand, I had mosquito repellent to spray clouds of mosquitoes away that wanted to enter there as well. So that was the daily kind of stuff. And the Amehuacas was the tribe, the small tribal group that had done the attack. The Amehuacas, I was assured, had been contacted long since and had been tamed into good Peruvians. I found not a trace of either our camps, even after a careful search, not a nail, not a post, not even a hole where a post had been. The strip we had cleared was completely overgrown, as if we had never been there. Only the forest was a lighter green there, if you knew where we had dragged the ship over the mountain. But the vegetation had grown up to its previous height. It was midday and very still. I looked around because everything was so motionless. I recognized the jungle as something familiar, something I had inside me, and I knew that I loved it, yet against my better judgment. Then words came back to me that had been circling, swirling inside me through all these years. Hearken, heifer, hoarfrost, denizens of the crag, will-o'-the-wisp, hogwash, uncouth, flotsam, fiend. Only now did it seem as though I could escape from the vortex of words. Something struck me, a change that actually was no change at all. I had simply not noticed it when I was working there. There had been an odd tension hovering over the huts, a brooding hostility. The native families hardly had any contact with each other, as if a feud reigned among them. But I had always overlooked that somehow, or denied it. Only the children had played together. Now, as I made my way past the huts and asked for directions, it was hardly possible to get one family to acknowledge another. The seething hatred was undeniable, as if something like a climate of vengeance prevailed from hut to hut, from family to family, from clan to clan. I looked around and there was a jungle manifesting the same seething hatred, wrathful and steaming, while the river flowed by in majestic indifference and scornful condescension, ignoring everything, the plight of man, the burden of dreams, and the torments of time.
Werner Herzog.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.